a forum with the folks at CSA on occupational health and safety and agriculture standards. The Canadian Agricultural Safety Association hosts these forums a few times a year, and we're always very excited to bring this information to the public about what's going on in agricultural health and safety and things that could impact farm safety. We are really excited today to have Cliff and Anna Marie with us today. I'm going to introduce Cliff first. Cliff is a manager, worker and public safety at CSA Group. Cliff oversees the development of standard-based solutions within occupational health and safety and public safety in Canada. In his 15+ years at CSA, he has been involved in the development of electrical safety and performance-based standards, including solutions, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and information and communications technology. Prior to CSA, Cliff spent 16+ years in product development and manufacturing roles within the automotive sector. Anna Maria is the Director of Strategic and Cross-Sector Initiatives at CSA Group. In her role, Anna Maria leads the development of 2 new standard sectors in the areas of transit and passenger rail and agriculture and agri-food. In the agriculture sector, she's overseeing the work around food loss and waste, regenerative agriculture, as well as data and automation. To drive and inform new standards development work, Anna Maria builds collaborative relationships with a broad range of public and private organizations, including academia, government, and industry, and coordinates high-impact standards-related research activities. Prior to her current role, Anna Maria supported the establishment of new standards initiatives within climate change, adaptation, and resilience, natural and nature-based solutions, low-carbon construction, and geonomics. Anna Maria has been with the CSA Group for 10 years. She holds a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Edinburgh and a Bachelor of Applied Science and Engineering from the University of Toronto. So I'd like to welcome them both here. And I realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Robin Anderson, Director of Communications and Programming at the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. So welcome to Cliff and Anna Maria, and also to Candace Sellers. She's going to be joining us for the Q&A. And Candace is with the Strategic Initiatives Manager in the Worker and Public Safety at CSA in the same area as Cliff. So welcome to Candace as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Cliff and Anna Maria for their presentation. And if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. We'll be holding those till the Q&A session at the end. So thank you so much. And Cliff, if you'd like to go ahead, please share your screen.
While Cliff brings up our slide deck, thank you so much, Robin, for the kind introductions. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. It's our pleasure to present to all of you on the work that we do here at CSA Group in the areas of agriculture and agri-food, as well as occupational health and safety. Cliff and I are going to take turns. So we're going to divide up the slides between ourselves. And we welcome any questions that you might have towards the end of the session. So just waiting for the slides to load, but hopefully.
Apologies, we seem to be having a few difficulties. I'm going to see if I can give you.
Can you not see it?
Sorry. Not yet. Can you try again, Cliff?
Yeah, it says it's sharing. Sorry, let me try it again.
There you go.
There it is. Yeah.
Can you see it now? Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Cliff.
Well.
So I'm going to start us off with an overview of CSA Group for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with our organization. I'm going to talk about some of our expertise in standards development and then provide some information on our agriculture and agri-food sector. And then, of course, I'll pass the baton along to Cliff, who will present on our occupational health and safety standards program. Go to the next slide. Okay, so there are actually 2 divisions within CSA Group. There is the Standards Development Organization, which you'll see on the left-hand side, which focuses on standards development, research, education, and advocacy. And we have our commercial subsidiaries, which entail testing, inspection, and certification services. CSA Group is a not-for-profit member-based organization, and at our core, we're focused on delivering societal good through the breadth of standards that we develop. Our standards organization is accredited in Canada by the Standards Council of Canada and in the United States by the American National Standards Institute. We are Canada's largest and most diversified standards development organization, and so we have activities in many different sectors. We could go to the next slide. Okay, so let's focus for a minute on our standards development organization. As I mentioned, we are accredited to develop national standards of Canada, as well as American national standards. And we do also sometimes work at the international level through the support of ISO and IEC standards development activities. Go to the next slide. The mission of our standards development organization is to enhance the lives of Canadians through the development of standards in the public and private sector. As I mentioned, we're a leader in standards research, development, education, and advocacy. It's important to note that CSA staff do not write the standards. Rather, we facilitate the standard development process, and we work with over 11,000 dedicated members who volunteer their time towards the development of standards. And currently, we have more than 3,000 standards and codes in our portfolio. We follow an accredited, balanced, consensus-based approach in the work that we do. Next slide. So we've been around for over 100 years. And so we have been actively advancing standards development across many different sectors, as I mentioned. Currently, we're actively working in 14 different areas of focus. And these, you'll see them listed on the screen. These include construction and infrastructure, electrical, environmental, and natural resource standards, fuels and transportation. Agriculture and agri-food is one of our newest standards development sectors. We have been active in this space in the past, but we now currently have a dedicated team and more focused activities dedicated to supporting the agriculture and agri-food sector through standardization. Okay, standards. Okay, and that's actually a really good segue. Thanks, Cliff. It's okay. It's perfect. Into the agriculture and agri-food standard sector. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so we've been actively focused on the agriculture and agri-food sector for about 2 years. We have had other standards development activities, that were dedicated to addressing specific gaps in the agri-food space, but currently our new sector is dedicated to addressing crop production, animal production and aquaculture, food manufacturing, as well as food services and drinking places. We identified that there was, currently a standardization gap in the agriculture and agri-food space in Canada, and there were some key drivers that informed our steps in establishing a new standards development sector. The first of the main drivers that we identified was, a shift towards increased focus on sustainability, circularity, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. This is something that the sector is quite focused on. We have, government departments that have placed a lot of focus, and there are, a lot of grants that are dedicated towards supporting these activities. So this is a space that we recognize as being of keynote importance in the agriculture and agri-food space. In addition to that, another key driver for us becoming involved in the space is the labor shortages that we're seeing in the agriculture and agri-food sector, which is then leading producers to turn to technological adaptations. The industry is really embracing things like automation, remote monitoring equipment, precision agriculture, AI, and all kinds of tools to make sure that they're able to address some of the sector challenges, such as labor shortages and rising costs. And associated with that, we noted that much focus is being placed on the use of data, privacy, and data governance. So because we're seeing kind of much more or a rather quick adoption of technology in the agriculture and agri-food space and much more reliance on more sophisticated technologies, data and data privacy and data governance has become of importance. to organizations within this space. And then last but not least, the last kind of key driver that prompted us to become more involved in the agriculture and agri-food space is the need for more transparency and traceability along the supply chain, whether we're looking at things like food safety or deforestation or greenhouse gas emissions, ESG metrics. There's a huge demand for more traceability of information in the agriculture and agri-food space. And so this is something that could be supported through the advancement of standards as well. We go to the next slide. Now, our agri-food sector has identified 4 main strategic priorities to inform our activities over the coming years. The first pillar looks at facilitating the use of data and automation to improve safety, efficiency, and sustainability. So again, this is just reflecting one of those key drivers that I mentioned earlier. The increased use of automation and data within the sector is something that we would like to support through the advancement of standards. And that's going to frame out some of our key activities within this space. The next pillar talks about advancing sustainability and circularity in the agriculture and agri-food sector, and there are many different areas that we're currently active in to help advance sustainable agriculture and agri-food practices across the country. Number 3, we recognize that there are many organizations that are actively supporting producers, farmers on the ground, and so we recognize the importance of working collaboratively in the sector as we look to advance standards. So building our network and enhancing collaboration is something that we recognize is critically important. And then last but not least, this is more of an internal CSA focused pillar, but maintaining effective cross-sector collaboration. And I think the fact that you have Cliff and I presenting here today jointly is a good example of that cross-sector collaboration where we, as a large standard development organization, we have standards development activities that could be leveraged to support and to help address some of the challenges that we're seeing in the agriculture and agri-food sector. And occupational health and safety is a great example of that. Cliff, I'm not sure what happened to the presentation. Yeah, so just maybe flip through the slides and I'll tell you when.
Not sure what happened there. Sorry, Anna.
Good. No problem. So that brings us to the structure of our agriculture and agri-food sector as it stands today. What you see on the screen here is kind of a schematic of the different activities that we have underway. The black boxes are activities that we recognize will want to advance, but have not been initiated yet, whereas the blue boxes are active areas of work. And so if we start at the very top, you'll see that we have identified the need for an agri-food strategic steering committee. This is something that we will look to establish over the coming months. And this is simply a group that would work with CSA hand in hand to inform what our standards development activities should focus on and to provide strategic advice to CSA Group. We do currently have 2 advisory groups that are active and that have been active for over a year and a half. We have one advisory group that's focusing on automation and the need for standards to support the use of automated tools in agriculture. And then we have another advisory group that helps us identify the need for standards around agriculture and agri-food data, and they have been quite busy. In addition to that, we have a number of research and standards development projects that are listed kind of in the white boxes and then below. So if we start on the left-hand side, we've identified a need for standardization around the use of biostimulants and the need for standardization around efficacy data. So that's something that we have kind of noted as a potential future standards development project. We have also been active in the area of regenerative agriculture. We have just recently published a research paper on regenerative agriculture. It's a landscape study that talks about the need for standardization. And we envision that as a next step, we would not only continue to advance research, but also jump into standard development to support regenerative agriculture across the country. We are now also actively working in the area of soil health. We have just recently initiated a new research project looking at soil health data and data management practices across the country. And we will be initiating 2 technical specifications on topics that have already been identified as, ripe for standardization. One is looking at soil health sampling methods, and the other is looking at reporting of soil health data. Food loss and waste is an area where we have had a lot of activity. We've advanced research, and we have a new research report that will be published at the end of February. So we'll please stay tuned for that publication if that's of interest to you. We also work at the international level, managing the Mirror Committee to ISO TC 34, Subcommittee 20 on food loss and waste. And we have a new National Standard of Canada development project underway, looking to set definitions and clarify measurement practices to help generate better data on food loss and waste across the country. In the area of agricultural genomics, this is a huge space. We are starting out with research, working collaboratively with research institutions across Canada, and this is through a Genome Canada grant. And this is kind of in the early stages at the moment, but something that we're quite excited to initiate. And then I'll quickly wrap up with the last few items on this slide. In the area of automation and robotics, we have done some work on the development of a technical specification for biosecurity for robotics used in greenhouses. We also recognize that there's much more work for us to do in this space, whether we're looking at validation of technologies or classifications of autonomous and robotics tools. In the area of ag data, we're looking at cybersecurity for agriculture and agri-food. We're working at the international level, looking at data-driven agri-food systems, so supporting the Mirror Committee to ISO TC 347. And then we also have new work that we will soon be launching on ag data governance. And then last but not least, looking at ag appliances. This is work that has been historically advanced and supported at CSA Group. And so this work will be continuing on, but just recognizing the tie-in to some existing programs within the organization that has been, active for some time now. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of some of the areas that we're advancing. We are very keen and interested to learn about some of the standardization gaps as they relate to occupational health and safety. We have had several conversations with some organizations within the space. And so we're keen to also learn from this group. And so your suggestions and recommendations are most welcome following Cliff's presentation. But I will maybe ask Cliff to take us to the next slide. And I'll just note that you can go to the CSA Group website for any more information on our agriculture and agri-food sector. We do have a dedicated landing page and some infographics, and this is where all of our publications will be linked. So please, visit that space for more information. And with that, I'll pass it over to Cliff.
Thanks, Anna Maria. So as Anna mentioned, I'm going to walk you through the Worker and Public Safety Program, sharing some of the highlights of where we are today with the program. And just, we thought we'd take a step back and maybe take a look at potential areas where maybe there's an opportunity to collaborate with the sector in certain areas across certain themes. And of course, as Anna indicated, we'd love to have your feedback on that. Now, I've been with the program for just under a year. I guess it's about 10 months. I've got my colleague, Candice, who's also on the call. She's been with the program for quite some time now. And, feel free to ask questions that perhaps get into some of the details here. We're happy to answer. So the OSH program's been around for a while. The first OSH standard was published over 75 years ago in 1948. So we are sort of dating ourselves a little bit. The current portfolio is relatively active. We've got over 70 different TCs. We've got over 1,500 volunteer members. And I think, as Anna Maria alluded to, it's not CSA that writes the standard. It's the volunteer members who contribute their time and expertise in the development of the standards themselves. We've got over 250. I think that number is probably getting closer to 270, 275 standards in both English and French. Now, what's I guess noteworthy is the Worker Public Safety Program itself is comprised of both the OSH component as well as the public safety component. And to support that, we actually have two distinct steering committees, strategic steering committees. And their role is really to provide guidance and direction to the occupational health and public safety programs themselves. And so their role is quite significant in how we move forward with our program in general. It is also worth noting that the worker and public safety standards in general is referenced quite widely in regulation, both at the provincial and territorial level, but even at the federal level. And we continually have discussions with the regulators across the country on, harmonization efforts across the country, which is always a big effort and a big undertaking, and somewhat controversial at times, but it does make for some interesting discussions. We also are supported by our education team with the development of educational and training products. And a lot of that is really to help help with the usability and the uptake of our standards. We develop standards really for them to be used, as opposed to, developing a standard around the need, only perhaps to have it sit on the shelf for a period of time and not be used. So we work very closely with the interested parties across the country to aid in the use, but sometimes we need a little push, and some of these education and training products can help with that. If we look at the OSH program itself, you can see that it covers some very broad themes. And some of these themes, when you kind of take a step back and pause, have a lot of relevancy within the ag sector. So we've got some management system standards, and these are just a few of them that are listed here. The topics themselves, I think, lend itself to, again, some of the areas within ag. We've got a suite of diving standards, which I think the aquaculture perhaps area, I don't know if that's necessarily the topic that we'll be talking about here today, but we do have occupational diving standards. Machine equipment and PPE, those are two big, broad areas that I think, whether it's ag or any other sector, really come into play, because you're dealing with the safety issues associated with machines and equipment that Anna alluded to is changing and evolving over time, and how to deal with that, how to deal with this evolving technology piece is something that we're seeing quite a bit in many of the sectors. And PPE, of course, is a foundational bit. It's sector agnostic. It's wherever you are, wherever you're working, wherever there's a worker, there's probably a need for PPE of some sort. Elevation hazards, another area potentially within ag and other industrial type sectors and construction and so on, when you have workers having to perform efforts at height. And you start getting into things like scaffolding and cranes and those types of things. And of course, the PPE and fall protection and that to deal with that. Worker safety, worker wellness. Here's an area that I think over time has started to become a little bit more prevalent across the various sectors. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment. It also, I think, is an area that, the agriculture sector is now seeing some need in the mental well-being or the psychological health and well-being of the farmer, and as in addition to that, the workers themselves. On the public safety side, we're really talking here about OSH today, but the public safety side, there is this overlap or adjacency between the two areas. So if we think about, emergency response to an incident, paramedic response to an incident, what are the considerations that they need? Well, things like PPE and so on are considerations for them. So when we approach a space, we take that into account. And we've got one or two projects right now that we're working on in the alternative fuel space. So for example, hydrogen. And what is the response needed for an incident that is either in the public domain on the road, for example, between vehicles and trucks or transportation or transit systems and so on? How do we respond to that? And it is a public safety address that needs to happen, but there's also an OSH component to that. Some of the bread and butter pieces within our public safety program is our transportation piece, in particular our transportation of dangerous goods. And again, looking at the sector when you're transporting things like various chemicals and fertilizers and so on, those are considerations that need to be taken into account. We work very closely with the feds, with Transport Canada on the development of this suite of standards within our portfolio. I wanted to, now that you've sort of got an overview, is to sort of spotlight a couple of different areas within our portfolio. And I wanted to start with machine and equipment safety. As I mentioned, to me, it's an area that is prevalent in all sectors when you are dealing with equipment and machines. Specifically for ag, one of the things that's been brought to our attention is apple pickers and the equipment needed for whether it's apples or other fruit of some sort. The machinery that's being used today is evolving. If you look on the left-hand side, this graphical representation depicts, and it's from the Canadian Ag Injury Reporting organization. And you can see here that machine-related fatalities account for 54% of the total fatalities over the 10-year period from 2011 to 2020. Of that 54%, more than 1/3 are due to rollover, runover, or pinned workers, which is pretty significant when you think about it. So as the industry is looking at new types of equipment, one of the things that really needs to be considered is the safety aspects of that equipment, and is there a standard that can support the the market penetration for something like that. Unfortunately, our research is telling us that on the fruit picker, apple picker side of things for this type of equipment, the data, there's very little data to support if in fact there are any issues with the equipment out there, which unfortunately is probably going to cause a bit of concern over time, especially as this type of equipment becomes more prevalent. So while it's designed to streamline, the harvesting process and maximize productivity, it is something to keep an eye on as to how far this goes without there being a standard. And to date, our indications are that there isn't a standard of this particular type of machinery available. The closest we have at CSA is our B354 series. And our B354 series is mobile elevating work platforms. We've got a series of 3 that deal with the mobility piece, the 354-6.7 and 0.8. They are referenced in some jurisdictions. However, these standards don't allow the worker to perform work while the platform is moving. And that is a challenge. That is a necessity of this equipment. We have had discussions, our project manager has had discussions with the chairs of this particular committee. And while it doesn't fit cleanly into an existing standard because of the nature of the work, it does fit into the overall scope of the committee. And so if there was a need to pursue this further, this would probably be a good place to start. Now, so what is the industry doing today? So we do know that the 354.6, 7, and 8, the 354.6 deals with more of the design of the equipment itself and the safety requirements of that equipment. The 7 is more the maintenance side, and 8 is on the training side. We do know that various pieces are referenced across the country, as I mentioned, across the different provinces and territories. Nova Scotia is the only province, to our knowledge, that references all 3, the 0.6, 0.7, and 0.8. Whereas, and in addition to that, the 0.8 being the training piece is actually the one that's probably the most widely referenced. So that's just data. What it all means, I think it comes back to the question, is there a need to move forward in this area, and what might a new safety standard look like? As I mentioned, worker wellness. Farming can be a stressful environment. both for the farmer as well as for the worker themselves. Long hours, there's financial considerations, there's weather unpredictability, there's inadequate support resources, especially when you start to get into these remote and rural communities. And over time, that can, lead to a lot of, psychological and health issues to deal with at various levels. Our CSA Z1003 takes a management system approach to this, and it deals with the prevention, promotion, and guidance to a staged implementation in dealing with psychological health and safety. It's probably important to note that internally, we took a look at, and this data isn't necessarily accurate, but we took a look at the sales of some of our standards by those entities, those organizations or individuals that we felt were part of the ag sector. And it's interesting that within the top 10 standards that we had, this standard showed up within the top 6 3 times. Now, 3 times you may ask, well, there is a psychological health and safety in the workplace standard. There's also a .1 that deals with paramedics and psychological health. And there's also a handbook that we had. So those 3 products, I think is fairly significant when you think about all the different products that we have and it being in the top 10. So is there a need? Again, we have to take a much closer look at that. Sorry, I think I'm getting kicked out. I don't know why. It does specify requirements and framework for a documented and systemic approach to develop and sustain a psychologically health and safe workplace. The 2nd edition has currently been launched. It launched about a month and a half, 2 months ago. It is, as many of our members tell us, probably badly needed. It's been about 11 years now since the 1st edition. And so there's a lot of content that needs to be updated just to sort of what they call catch up. But it is trying to simplify things. It's trying to simplify things for broader use and broader uptake. It has been constructed in the 2nd edition to also include more diversity within the committee itself. And foundationally, we like to look at it as a standard that is applicable to all the different sectors, regardless of size of the organization or regardless of where the work is being performed. The other piece that is worth mentioning in the Worker Wellness Program is a recently published standard that was published back in April of 24 on EDI, so equity, diversity, and inclusion. This particular standard also included accessibility, and it was specific to apprenticeship programs. So what it does is it provides principles and strategies to organizations to assist the equity diverse groups to succeed at the trades through every stage of the apprenticeship journey. So that's really important to consider. The one thing about this particular standard is that it was actually used and hoped that it would have an impact on the workforce and to help address some of the labor shortages that we've been seeing across the country. Now, while the standard itself has been targeted for apprenticeship programs, there's a lot of general requirements within the standard that makes it sector agnostic. So there are a lot of things that can be gleaned in this and used elsewhere within various sectors across the country. The next one is emergency and continuity management. So this is our Z1600 standard. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety described this as an area where emergency preparedness and response plan, including animal evacuation plan, is one of the preventive measures for a farmer to use. Now, there are lots of plans and stuff that the farmers can use and I think should continue to use. This is not talking about those plans. This is talking about more of a systemic approach to emergency and continuity planning that takes a much higher level look at this whole space and provides the continuous improvement piece, the continuously evolving piece within this space. It applies to organizations regardless of the size or purpose. It certainly fits into the Plan, Do, Check, Act continual improvement model, and it uses a risk-based approach to management programs. It provides a set of requirements to develop, implement, evaluate, maintain, and continually improve management system program for the prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. There is a new edition planned. Launch is imminent. It will update the current content and to make it more meaningful, more up to date. But perhaps most importantly, it's going to look at the new edition through a climate change lens. Through the support of our accreditation organization, SCC, we are looking to build on what we're seeing across the country with extreme weather events, and in particular, the extreme weather events and the impact it's having on remote and rural communities, to update and bring some more relevance to the standard itself. That will also entail that the committee membership is addressed to include those individuals that are exposed to that type of environment and Indigenous peoples who are experiencing it firsthand to help with establishing the new requirements going forward in this next edition. Of course, it will take into account infrastructure needs, and as I mentioned, the vulnerable populations that exist across the country. Is there a further need for the ag sector? I think that's something we'd love to hear from the sector itself to see if it's something that we need to address. The last spotlight I wanted to include was a little bit on the, let's call it emergency response side of things, so linking paramedics and farms. There are examples of challenges, or here are some examples of challenges that paramedics and farms are facing. So many of these locations are in remote and rural locations, which means that there are delays in responding. There might be limited equipment and machinery that is available locally for the need or for the incident that needs to be responded to. Simple basic things like phone coverage can be challenging. And of course, all of this leads to delays and, like I mentioned, and response times. They are dealing with complex, unique, dangerous environments for the paramedics. So not only machinery and equipment, but also animals and chemicals and so on. So having the right equipment, having the right PPE, knowing what to do in the face of that incident becomes extremely important. Having the proper training and education is also very important. And training and preparedness, as I said, is something that these paramedics need to deal with, specifically for farm-specific incidents. What I've listed on the right-hand side is a suite of standards that we currently have within our paramedic first responder community. We do have a competency standard for paramedics, Z1660, which was published earlier this past year in 24. I mentioned the 1003, the Psychological Health and Safety Paramedic Service Organization standard that we have. We also have a pretty interesting, pretty unique one happening right now, the Z1670, which is a competency standard for emergency responders engaged in hydrogen incidents. And this one in particular is gaining a lot of attention within the space. It probably mirrors a lot of what the electric vehicle space or electrified space has been experiencing over the years in terms of incidences that can happen and the response that's needed. So there are some parallels there. That project has just been started and will be kicking off, launching the first committee any moment now. So we're excited about that work. I will close this one here just by saying that I did speak with one of our paramedics, or one of our members who was in the paramedic space just last week, and I brought this up with him, and one of the things that he mentioned that kind of echoes what I have here is, he mentioned two areas. There are hazardous materials that they deal with, like fertilizers and, volatile chemicals and so on, that require diligence on behalf of the paramedics. In particular, their thing is, how do they select the appropriate PPE especially, when they are responding to remote and rural communities. The other thing that he mentioned was, dealing with heavy equipment. Extrication can be challenging, and it requires, in many cases, persons that are trapped inside the equipment conveyor or processing side of things. And it's a unique situation for them that they have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. He said that they rely on expertise of the farmer. They also, in many cases, rely on other public safety personnel to help with these incidences. And so, again, just dealing with it, understanding it, having the knowledge and the training and the skills is something that they deal with on a case-by-case basis. So there seems to be perhaps a challenge in this particular area. And again, we're looking for the sector to help us understand the space a little bit better. So with that, I think I'll leave it there. I'll turn it over for questions and answers. We have about 20 minutes or so left. If there's anything that you've heard is of interest that you'd like to pursue further, or if you have some questions for us, we'd be happy to answer. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Robin.
Thanks so much, Cliff. That was really interesting and informative. I learned a lot, and I am excited to learn more. We always know that CSA, is very much golden when we talk about the safety of equipment and things, but also the idea that there are standards that apply to things like psychological safety in the workplace. That's really interesting and really informative, and I think helpful for